Welcome to this course titled Critical Reading, Writing, and Speaking as designed and produced by the Region 11 Service Center. In this course, you'll learn how to engage students in reading, writing, and speaking strategies, which as a unit are considered critical literacy. The term critical kicks it up a notch. When we use the term critical in the phrase critical literacy, we're asking students to go beyond rote memorization and knowledge making. Students will engage in critically thinking by using what they read, hear, and process to produce a written product of some type, whether it's formative or summative in nature. For today's presentation, you'll need a copy of Focus by Mike Schmoker. Just for your information, we'll be using the term critical literacy and authentic literacy interchangeably today. At the conclusion of this course, you'll have an opportunity to demonstrate your understanding of the stated learning objective by participating in a demonstration lab, which is sponsored by Region 11 Certification Team. During the demonstration lab, you'll present a 10 mini lesson in which you provide one critical literacy strategy that uses the components of reading, writing, and speaking. You'll receive feedback based on the proficiency rubric you see on the screen. To earn credit for this course, participants must score at the proficient or master's level. So, considering this, get yourself settled, grab you a copy of the resources, and let's get started. Mike Schmoker sets the stage for authentic literacy and why we want to employ such an important instructional move in our classrooms. Please pause the video now and read pages 74 to 89 of Focus. You'll read to the end of the chapter. One important step in ensuring critical reading, writing, and speaking is to pre-teach vocabulary. Also, letting students know why they're reading something is super important. We want to generate interest in the topic by giving them a prompt or a question to ponder. We can't assume that students know how to annotate or interact with the text. It's essential that teachers model and show think-alouds for students so they can learn the thought processes behind what it takes to understand what they read. As a next step of modeling your reading, it's essential for students to engage in guided practice while you formatively assess their progress. Schmoker lists several ways students can practice, such as circulating as students annotate, having students pair and share, calling on random students to share, and asking students to quick write while you monitor. Schmoker reminds us how important it is to circulate and be present in the power zone. The next step after guided practice is, of course, independent practice of students purposefully underlining, annotating, and making notes. The goal is to make annotating a routine so the next several instructional strategies will be successful. As Schmoker says on page 84, people truly do enjoy sharing what they've learned from close reading. Having students debate and discuss is a great way for them to not only show their learning, but to hear others' perspectives. Schmoker asks us to remind students to cite sources, to stay on point and be concise, and to work on establishing appropriate discussion norms like treating each other with respect and avoiding slang or informal communication. To further extend discussion, students should write, plain and simple. In content areas other than English language arts, a list, outline, or informal writing would suffice. We want to ensure students cite the text, which is why we ask them to annotate, underline, and take note anyways. In English language arts, students will certainly have more detailed writing instruction. Nonetheless, math, science, social studies, and elective teachers can certainly choose to have students write more formally. Critical literacy means that students do not do these steps in isolation, but that each builds on the other. What students read and annotate, they then need to write about. Furthermore, they need to speak, whether it's informal or formal, about what they've read and written. These three skills work together to expand and show students critical thinking. Again, the reading, writing, and speaking work together to extend learning. At this moment, we want to focus on the concept of task, text, and talk. This simple formula will allow content area classes to incorporate even more critical literacy. Pause the video now and read more about Task, Text, Talk. Read pages 139 through 140 of Focus. Stop before the title Task, Text, and Talk and World History. On the screen, you'll see a social studies example of Task, Text, and Talk. We start with what we expect students to know and be able to do, which is the task. In this case, students will write a paper about a major era in history. Before they can start writing, we ask students to read several sources about that era. Small groups of students may be researching and reading different parts of that time period. Then, students talk about what they read with others, which can result in different perspectives of that time period. All this reading and talking will then lead students to completing the task, which is writing a paper about the time period. We'll always ask students to cite their sources. Similarly to social studies, teachers can apply task, text, and talk in science classes. Schmoker suggests on page 164 that students need frequent opportunities each week to read science-related text and to perform oral and written tasks within the framework of a coherent body of science content. He implores us to balance the number of science labs we ask students to participate in by grounding them in content, which of course could be done with critical literacy. Best practices in math instruction have changed over the last few years. You should find a more balanced approach between numeracy and conceptual understanding. For this reason, critical reading, writing, and speaking are fundamental for students to be able to develop important communication skills needed to think and reason mathematically. The Texas Mathematical Process Standards emphasize analyzing relationships, as well as justifying mathematical ideas and arguments, while speaking and writing with precise mathematical language in order to acquire and demonstrate mathematical understandings. Story problems are a perfect example of reading students have to do in math class. Essentially, they're just as much of reading problems as they are math problems. First, the teacher should ask the students to read the story to themselves in order to derive meaning of the content. Numbers can be omitted from the story to encourage reading from meaning. Next, the students should have an opportunity to retell the story in their own words with a partner. Then, the teacher should represent the story with a map or diagram as restated by the students. At this point, we can introduce numbers back into the story. Students should use the diagram to organize the information and solve the problem based on the actions of the story. The students may have different pathways that lead to the same solution. The emphasis is not on which operation should be used, but on making sense of the story. To deepen critical literacy, students should write a justification of their solution that takes the reader back to the meaning of the story. Sentence stems could be used as a frame to help students begin the writing process. Stems like, I solved this problem by, or I know I'm right because, and I figured this out by. Now, let's look at an example of what authentic and critical literacy might look like in an elective content such as 5th grade music. What to do might sound like this. Students, I'm going to ask you to read and annotate these song lyrics that I'm passing out to you. You'll eventually be talking to someone about what you notice, so make sure you underline ideas that you think are very important or worth mentioning to someone else. At which point, the teacher would walk around the room and monitor as students read and annotate. We'll next show how the teacher will extend the reading through discussing. The teacher could also choose to follow up the reading with writing. As a result, what to do might sound like this. Students, now get with your shoulder partner and discuss what you underline and why. Compare your annotations with your partner. Be prepared to share a general statement about the conclusions you drew from your discussion together. At which point, the teacher would walk around the room and monitor as students discuss. We'll next show how the teacher will extend the discussion through writing. Note that the teacher would next play the song for the students. Last, what to do might sound like this. Now that we've listened to the song, I want you to consider what you previously thought about and what you just heard. Please write a response in which you analyze the words in the context of the music. For example, how did the tune of the music add to the song lyrics? How did the words and music work together? How did the music change what you previously thought about the lyrics? You have 10 minutes to write about any or all of these topics. At which point, the teacher would walk around the room and monitor as students write. Notice how students read, spoke, and wrote. The order of reading, speaking, and writing can be changed depending on the task, as long as they're all complementary and completed together as a unit. Now it's time for a little quiz. On the upper right-hand portion of this screen, you'll see a pop-up that links to a video. At this point, please pause and click on that video link. As you watch the video, determine if the teacher gives a task in which the students read, write, and speak about the topic. Let's reflect on the teacher's task. The teacher asks students to read and annotate the text for 15 minutes. She then says after about 15 minutes, students will discuss what they've done at that point. Her directions are not very clear about the discussion component, but she does have time dedicated to sharing about what they read. Last, regarding writing about the text, she does say students are hearing and speaking, talking about it, asking questions, and processing as a group. They'll take that information they have read and discuss and move it to a written task. Certainly, this teacher has mastered the reading and annotation portion. While the components for discussion and writing are a bit less clear, please remember that for authentic and critical literacy to have an impact, all three need to work together as a unit. They also need to push student thinking to a deeper level. We may not have seen all three components clearly in this 5-minute video, but there's certainly time in a typical class period to accomplish all three. Now that you've seen some examples of critical literacy, let's review the proficiency rubric one more time. During the demonstration lab, you'll present a 10-minute mini lesson in which you model critical reading, writing, and speaking. You'll receive feedback based on the proficiency rubric you see on the screen. To earn credit for this course, participants must score at the proficient or master's level. To score proficient, teachers must provide one critical literacy strategy that uses reading, writing, and speaking together as a unit. And to bump that up to masters, the teacher will need to extend the critical literacy strategy by asking students to defend their ideas or encouraging student discourse or making the context more relevant for the students. The next few slides will contain some reminders and pointers as you prepare for your 10-minute mini lesson. Spend up to the first 4 minutes setting a purpose for reading and building background of a short text, and then having students read and annotate that text. Remember, as students are reading, you as a teacher are circulating around the room and ensuring students are annotating, taking notes, and interacting with the text. You might then ask students to either write about what they read in a notebook, journal, or in the form of a response. Another option is to have them talk in partners or small groups about what they read. The order of discussion or writing next is ultimately driven by the task. For example, if the task is longer or in depth, such as a 2 or 3 page writing assignment in which you're asking students to take a position and defend it with evidence from the text, well, you would have them discuss it first to get ideas from others and then write. They could then pull from their own notes from the reading as well as their discussion points to help them as they write their paper. If discussion is the second step, give students 2 to 3 minutes in this mini lesson. If writing is the second step, since it will be a reflection about what they read, about 3 or 4 minutes is appropriate. Remember, as students are completing the second step, you're working the power zone and checking in with students, whether they're speaking or writing. Step 3 is to complete the critical literacy bundle by finishing with either writing or discussing. If students end with a written task, they'll complete their notes, thoughts, and discussion into a piece of writing. If, as a second step, students wrote a response or reflection about the text, they'll then share their feelings about their findings and ideas with a partner, small group, or even whole group. They could also debate their ideas. This third component will last the remainder of the 10-minute mini-lesson, so between 2 and 4 minutes, depending on how time was used in the previous 2 steps. As students are completing the third and final step of critical literacy, you're circulating and checking in with students. This allows you to provide quick feedback as necessary to students. You'll always want to wrap up the lesson by bringing students back together. You could extend the lesson by asking them to defend their positions and citing evidence from the text, either orally or in writing, asking students to debate or engage in more formal discussions, or by having them take critical literacy a step further through a real-world context. Thanks for watching this course module titled Critical Reading, Writing, and Speaking. It's a very important and overlooked literacy strategy that works for all content areas and grade levels. Good luck, and feel free to review this video at any time as you prepare for your upcoming mini lesson. Today's material referenced the book Focus by Mike Schmoker and used downloaded images from Pixabay.